appreciated truly.
Thank you.
I don't see, for some reason, the bio, but we know he's an academic demographer and a member of the Tall Boys. He's spoken to us several times on a variety of topics, and they're always interesting. He's speaking today on Mexico and crime, fact, fiction, and analysis. This presentation will objectively examine and discuss the facts and fiction surrounding this important topic that brought so many of you here today. David, Associate Professor at Central Connecticut State University for 12 years before moving to the Ajijic community permanently in 2010. So,
here I go.
Welcome.
Thanks. How's everybody? Are you scared?
No.
Well, Jim asked me to do this talk. We talked about me doing another talk, and obviously, usually I talk about more lighter subjects. And I told him I really don't want to be an authority on drugs or drug cartels, because it just seems to be kind of like putting the old bullseye on yourself. But, in fact, when I was at the University of South Carolina, I studied with a gentleman named Moss Blackman, who was a political scientist and wrote a book called Drug War Policy, and really examined a lot of the reasons for the drug wars, which have been going on, by the way, for hundreds of years in various types of forms. And so today what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about not only what's happening here, but more importantly, what's going on in Mexico, why it happened here, what are some of the factors affecting it, and to kind of look at a little bit of the overall aspect, what's going on with this kind of drugs in our society, because you can't talk about one without talking about the other. And it's amazingly geographic. Of course, I say that about everything. I can say that about punk music, I can say that about blues, I can say that about anything, but it's true. But first I want to take you back in 1978. I was playing in one of my first bands called the Truly Original Band that played a bizarre collection of like Andrew's Sisters meets the Grateful Dead. And we were playing in the Florida Keys in a place called Alamorada, a very famous fishing capital at the time, and also pretty famous for drugs at the time, because it was a perfect place to bring them in. And I made good friends with a woman named Janet Reno, who was yeah, it is kind of funny actually. Janet Reno, her cousin was down there. We became very good friends. I visited her and her mom at their house in South Dade County. And she'd come out to hear us play, and she was the district attorney for Dade County, and obviously went on with Bill Clinton. But at that time, she'd come out and hear us play, and I remember one night playing in the bar, looking out in the audience. There's Janet Reno and all her friends, and I was looking at all the people she was trying to catch. Were all right there. Right there, man. And I was just going like, wow, this is something. You know, this is a picture I won't forget. So, but what happened then is, I gotta tell you, it was a fairly, and it was the beginning of a change though, because during that time in the 70s and early 80s, we had the Mariel boat lift from Cuba. And after that, all of a sudden, bodies started washing up in Biscayne Bay. And all of a sudden, the kind of love, peace, hippie drug years were gone. And we were into big business, drug cartels, laundering, and an entirely new system kind of came about, which has changed forever the dynamics between the United States, Mexico, Central America, and most countries. So what I want to start talking about is we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Mexico, talk about Ajijic, and then I'm going to talk about why I think it's happening and why it's happening the way it is now. For most of you know, the PRI, or the Institutional Revolutionary Party here in Mexico, controlled the politics for about 70 years. And for all intents and purposes, their approach to the drug business and drug trafficking was pretty much limited to kind of don't ask, don't tell. And except when it got kind of bloody and violent, they do some arrests, but the idea was to kind of let it go. Because in actuality, a lot of them felt like, this is an American problem, United States problem. And I will say this now, and I'll say it again a million times, the biggest demand is in the United States. Okay, that's where it's come from. And you can't have supply unless you have demand. Okay. And I'm not pointing fingers, but it's just the reality of the thing. And so, what happened? Penn took over the National Action Party, and there was a shift in this whole thing, and a shift in an alliance with the United States, and with President Obama, and the United States in general on going after cartels. And really, with Calderon, it started in 2006, primarily in Michoacan with a group called La Familia, which was an old drug cartel that had been there for quite a while. And it has since obviously escalated. And through this, some of the deals that we've done, obviously the United States has supplied lots of money, lots of legal advice and things like that, no military assistance at this point. But also extradition as an option. And extraditing prisoners and people out of the country into another country has been proven to be pretty successful at breaking up cartels. I'm not saying ending them, but it breaks them up. Okay? Obviously, most of us are familiar with the Fast and Furious issues that happened with the Department of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms. They're kind of interesting perspectives on trying to filter drugs into Mexico to be able to find the drug cartels. Of course, they lost them. So, and but there's now the idea is that actually this part of this was the idea to promote something called Demand Letter 3 law, which was to encourage more long-term, for particular buyers who bought more than a certain amount of weapons and certain types of weapons, is that they would be documented over time. And this was particularly targeted at the hundreds and hundreds of gun stores that littered the southern part of the United States. Okay? So part of this, the idea was that this is to try to stimulate this, of course, much as for granted of gun associations and things like this. And if you haven't seen it at some point, there was, Calderon has certainly shown his frustration with it in the sense that up in El Paso, or in Ciudad Juarez on the other side, he made a big, huge billboard that faced north that said, "No more weapons, please." Okay, so this has been a struggle for both. And if you talked, and I've talked to a lot of Mexicans who, and a lot of them feel like that, in fact, the days when there was a kind of a blind eye, people weren't getting killed. It changed. And some people will say, and have said to me, that, and I, in order to do this, I've basically been watching tons of documentaries, pulling out tons of articles from all sorts of sources. And what I found is in a way it'd be great to go back to the way it was, but there's no way to go back to the way it was now. Because what has happened is an escalation and a change in the types of activities of these drug cartels. And I'm going to say one word that's very, very important, and that is narco-terrorist. And that terrorist is an important key, and I'm going to explain it more. But this has been the change. So let's talk a little about what's really kind of going on in the country. Now, my wife's an artist, I'm not, so don't even think this is going to look good. But anyway, let's pretend this is kind of like Mexico. Okay. If you look at this, basically what you're going to see is this area over here is controlled pretty much by the Sinaloa gang, Mr. El Chapo, who is a very bright man, and Forbes magazine considered him one of the richest men in the world, by the way. This area over here, beginning in Tamaulipas, or Laredo, and going down on the Gulf Coast, and actually southern states like Chiapas and Guerrero, is controlled at this point by the Zetas. And when you say Zetas, a certain amount of fear. And there should be. The Zetas were military trained, elite Mexican army. That's who they are. And they're really good at what they do. They learn these tactics in the same type of warfare that went after terrorists. Most governments use that same kind of techniques in Central and South America. So these guys were very trained. It was led by originally a guy named Arturo Guzman de Sena. He was killed. And basically this Zeta group was was developed for another group called the Gulf Cartel. They hired these guys to help them to fight off the different groups that were shooting for routes. Because remember this, folks, this border, you know, there's planes and there's boats, but you know what? When if you drive through Laredo and you see how many trucks are going across that bridge, there's no possible way to catch the amount of drugs that are going across. And drug dealers are smart. They find different ways to do things all the time. So obviously, this is where the traffic is. This is where the action is. And controlling these roads and controlling these routes and controlling these areas is geographically, strategically imperative for control of that. Realize that historically, this has been the transfer place for drugs from Colombia, South America, where the cocaine comes in and goes up, okay? Marijuana production is pretty strong in these areas, but you want to know how I know all about this. I'm not going to tell you. But anyway, but it is. I mean, you're down in these areas, and this is ripe growing fields, okay? And so for marijuana particularly, and still, it's one of the biggest products, actually. But it's basically been as transportation. That's the basic aspect. That's why Mexico's always been important, always been involved. But before it was basically just crossover place. Efforts in Colombia to stamp out crime and these types of things, we'll talk about in a minute, has made this more important in a lot of areas. So they started this, and the Zetas started. They were so efficient in what they did, they broke off because they developed their own ability to kind of take over. And obviously all these guys are always fighting more turf and more money. And here's a list of some of the things that have been involved in. To bring you down, but the Apodaca prison riot, which wasn't too long ago, 44 Gulf Cartel inmates were killed, 37 Zetas escaped. Altamira prison ball, 31 Gulf Cartel inmates were killed. 2011 Monterey casino attack, 50 killed. 2010 San Fernando massacre, 72 migrants were dead. 2011 San Fernando massacre, 193. Massacre of 27 farmers in Guatemala. By the way, these guys work out of, they have Guatemalan army guys that come up. And if you remember back in the 60s and 70s, in the United States, when we had the term USS Honduras, we were worried about communism coming up through the bottom. And this is our attack. And so areas like Guatemala, El Salvador, and places like this, these were also areas that were, you know, the efforts here were, yes, it was a little communism, but a lot of times it was more of just a socialist form of government. But because at that time we were in the Cold War, it was marked as communist, so that was a threat. And so a lot of U.S. training and the military personnel went to these areas to train these people, give them lessons on how to do their job. And so you've got some pretty well-trained people in these areas. So the Zetas also recruited people out of the Guatemalan military to come up and help them with this type of thing, because obviously there is Central America, Colombia, right at the tip of South America. It's a typical bus ride up through the mountains, through the Panamanian area, and straight to Central America. So, and then, you know, there's more. 249 is the Durango massacres, there's the oil pipeline explosion. These guys have been pretty active, and nowadays they control about 11 or 12 states in Mexico, and in fact, they control the largest geographic expanse, okay, as far as just space goes. The Sinaloas have lost some, and they're fighting this. Basically, what you have is the Zetas are here and up here, and they're moving up here. Sinaloa is here. And so you've got Michoacan and some of these areas. Obviously, Jalisco's in here. And so that brings me to the next point. What we've seen is we've got major cartels. And there's, you know, I'm going to name you basically the ones. Juarez Cartel, which is out of Ciudad Juarez. Tijuana Cartel, out of Tijuana, obviously. Zetas, Beltran Nieva Cartel, Chihuahua. These have all kind of teamed up together to go against Gulf Cartel, Sinaloa Cartel, La Familia. So, and what you always see is this stuff is shifting as people are taken out. And leaders are taken out. And actually, Calderon has been been doing a very good job of capturing a lot of these people. And some of these sits into the United States. The problem is, it's kind of like when you cut off the head of a Medusa, you got 7 other heads. And sometimes even worse than the head that was there. So realize that this is an evolution. I was raised in Florida and in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. I remember then the terminal of Tampa was a huge port for the mafia. And I remember there was a period of time when there were people getting killed outside of the door all the time. And what that was, it was some of the old school, the heads of some of the mafia groups who were basically making that conversion to legal criminal activities, like casinos, hotels. Every organization owns a trash disposal company, you know, so they can get rid of their problems and they can clean up. This is standard, everybody knows this. And I mean, you look at organized crime in the United States, it's evolution. And basically what we're talking about here is we're seeing an evolution because they're behind us, because we're the more developed country. Okay, so they're developing their crime. We'll talk about development. So what happens is, so basically we see these factions going against each other. So somebody said, so why Ajijic? Well, first of all, because we're kind of located where these two heads are starting to meet, because Zetas are coming up. And also, this is kind of undisputed territory. Some of this in the middle. You have Chapala, it's controlled. This is undisputed territory. So where it's undisputed, somebody wants to control it. So why is it happening here? It's happening because of geography. And there's some major roads that come up through here on either side of us, going through Guadalajara. Guadalajara's a big city. It's a big area. For a long time, you know, I mean, they've caught a lot of the drug cartel guys there for a long time. Guadalajara was kind of a hands-off city. All that's changed. I mean, there were times when the officials would leave people alone. So one of the reasons is that we're kind of located in a hot spot, in a way, okay? Now, what that raises up to then is, why would they do it here? And there's a couple of reasons. One is there's a demand for drugs here. A lot of this has to do with two things. One is migration of a lot of Mexicans back to Mexico. And they've been living in the States and they've picked up some pretty great habits. People in LA, a lot of the younger Mexicans that have been kicked out of LA, that have been deported. And also, just generally speaking, if you look at, you know, there's been a big furor in the United States about illegal immigration. The Pew Educational Fund did a huge study just recently, and in fact, they tell us what a lot of us already knew, and that is that has been slowing down for the last 5 years because of lack of jobs. The economy in the United States, there's not enough jobs. So Mexicans are coming back, and they're coming back here, but they've been in the States. And sadly, very often, sometimes when these Mexicans have been in the States, they've been in inner city areas where they've gotten involved with crime, and so they've been either deported or they've picked up habits with gangs and stuff, and they come back, and some of that migrates back with them. Those behaviors come here. And we have some of them here. Why do they come here? Well, one reason is because of you. Because they can speak English. And so automatically, they feel like that's why they go to tourist areas and places like that, because they can find jobs, because they have language skills. And that's not always a good thing, but that's the reality of what happens. Now, are there lots of them here? No. There's a lot more in Guadalajara, there's a lot more in bigger cities, because you're too visible here. And the other factor that's here is that, you know, and I do want to, I'll talk a little bit, I presume some of you probably went to the meeting on Wednesday, where the police chief talked about things. And I just will tell you this, and that is that one of the fundamental concepts of terrorism is fear. Guerrilla warfare is strategic. Terrorism is fear. It's chaos. Rumors start here faster than any place I've ever seen. They really do. They really do. 5 people were killed. It's true. Somebody else talks about it. All of a sudden, the story's changed enough that those 5 people sound like there's probably 10 now. And somebody else changed it, now it sounds like 15. And all of a sudden we got here, they told women, they took children away from Hokotepec, from the school. I got to tell you, and I know this, that there was some people that said that as a political ploy. Realize that we have an election coming up here between PAN and PRI. PRI would like to get back in power. One of PAN's biggest problems right now is this fear that's overwhelming a lot of Mexicans and this concern. So, if it looks worse than even it is, it might sway people to vote for PRI. Because right now, Josefina is not doing very good in the polls. Okay? So, I mean, and we are in a very, it is a developing country in certain ways. In certain ways, I call countries like this sixth world. And you remember you had the first world, second world, third world. And you had your first world most developed, and communist, and third world poverty. You add up 3, 2, and 1, you get 6. The sixth world, because you have the richest man in the world right here, and you have some of the richest societies and towns, and you have some of the poverty, but you have all that stuff in the middle, okay? So this is a truly developing, evolving society. And actually, in a lot of ways, if you look at it on human index levels and stuff, it's doing quite well, except for this factor, okay? But this is part of it. This is the evolution. But the rumors that have started here have been really troubling because they encourage fear. As part of my research, I went out last night, and I was out at 1 o'clock in the morning. I was having beers and I was looking around, and you know what I can tell you is I've been out every night watching, and last night was the first night I saw Mexican kids on the street playing, taco stands open, neighborhood joints open, people running around. It was a sign that people were coming back, and you know what? You can't be afraid, because that's what they want. Terrorists thrive on that. Fear and chaos is the perfect environment for them to do what they want. They like to make people afraid because it allows them to delegitimize the government and the police and everyone else. And it gives them more power base to do what they want to do, which is just more of the same. So it was interesting to me last night going out to see, and yeah, there's a lot of places that are closed, but it is the slowest time of the year. I mean, it really is. And so, all these places are closed, but yet there were places open, but it was just good to see the Mexican population out on the streets again, coming out. And, I don't want to get a lot into the exact, I know all these different issues that have kind of come up, but I mean, I think this is important to realize that, and I want to talk about this terrorism a little bit more and what this is really all about. The other reason that this may have happened here is that national attention, international attention. Okay. In 1994, I was down working on my master's thesis in Chiapas, in San Cristobal de las Casas. I was going down in the rainforest, looking at ethnic tourism on the Latino Indians. Bang, the next day I woke up and it was the Zapatista Revolution. I was in the middle of a war. And the reason those guys did it there, and we were there when they came in, and I mean, it wasn't a war. These guys came in with hardly shootable 22 caliber rifles with masks, and they asked all the foreigners to kindly step out of the way while they went into the government office and threw the papers around and took over for like 10 hours until authorities came, and then they ran to the woods. But the point is what they were doing is they knew that San Cristobal de las Casas was a very, very popular place with educated people and travelers that fit that profile. And what happened is, the women there had these little Mayan dolls that they always used to get, Guatemalan dolls, and so what did they do? The men had to run and scatter because they were supposedly under threat. The Mexican government come after them. They put the Zapatista masks on them and they sold them. They made money off of it. And they also spread the cause, which was, this is where the most indigenous people live in Mexico, and it's really treated, and they have lack of access to social services, and that's what this was all about, basically. Okay? But they use that location for that reason. So the idea of something happening close to here kind of makes sense. And the thing is, well, what about foreigners? Let me tell you, folks, if they wanted to kill us, right now's the time. We're all sitting here. If they wanted us, they could get us anytime they want. They don't want us. They don't want us because that could possibly bring down U.S. troops, which I think would be a disaster for everybody, honestly, because usually those things just escalate even further. But the point is, so they're walking a tightrope because they want to get that attention because it makes the government look bad. It makes the politics look bad. And it makes them look even more powerful. So that's my take on the Ajijic situation at this point. And so let me just carry on by saying, when we look at the history of this, because I want you to understand what's happened. guerrilla warfare, and they've been funded by drugs all the time. Guerrilla warfare concentrates on strategic stuff that takes down the government, that makes them look bad, that develops camaraderie with the common people that don't have access to these things. This is what happened in places like Nicaragua. This is what happened in other areas in the 60s and 70s under the guise of communism, more or less, or socialism, whatever, that brought some problems. Even in Colombia with the FARC, I mean, their general idea was to take over the government. It was a communist revolutionary army. They used drugs. And the guerrilla style was the idea, though, in the meantime of taking down the government, but you're also creating alliances with the common people to be on your side. That's what you want. You want them on your side. Terrorists, on the other hand, like the Shining Path in Peru, if you remember that. Shining Path in Peru. It's about chaos. It's about chaos theory. It's about disorder. It's basically anarchy. That's what they want. Because by tearing it down, they give themselves a fertile breeding ground for doing whatever they want to do. Whether it's selling drugs, and this is what's happened. While it was governmental and political in some ways, what's happened now is we have narco-terrorists. And so the game has changed. They're using the same strategy that was used in political events. Now they're using this in the drug business. So it's not just a business either. Realize that there was an interview that somebody did, a journalist did in the United States with El Chapo, who's the leader of the Sinaloa. And basically, El Chapo said that, they're already recruiting young Mexicans. You recruit them to shoot and do all that stuff. He says, no, I'm recruiting. I'm going to send them to law school, send them to computer science school. I'm going to send them to these areas business school, because then they can integrate into the bigger economy, right? So what's going on here is an evolution of organized crime, and they're moving over, like I said, here to this idea of narco-terrorism by creating this image that the government's ineffective, and by, but the problem they run into too by doing this, though, and what's happening here, is that they're also, by hitting what seems to be innocent Mexicans, and I will tell you this, that my maid's nephew was killed. He was one of the ones taken and killed. But in conversation with her, you find out that, Mexicans have large extended families. And maybe out of that 120 people in that extended family, there may be one guy or one person that's involved with some drug dealing person. And so saying that all these are just random may be incorrect. I mean, and the reality, folks, it's like this kind of thing. I mean, the statistics, you can't be exactly sure always who's telling the truth about what, exactly what's going on. But, when you start looking at what these people are trying to do, the idea of just randomly taking people, if they really, really want to be doing that, they could be doing way more of that. I mean, and they could be targeting you, they could be targeting these groups. A lot of this is fear-mongering, and so, but this is the deal with these terrorists. So this has happened for quite a while, and now I want to tell you about my work with this gentleman named Moss Blackman. Moss Blackman is now in South Carolina. He runs one of the hospitals there because he's an incredible administrator. But he wrote a book called The Drug War Policy. And basically in this book, what he set out is they analyzed how we were combating drugs and how we've been doing it. And basically we use this. We use a supply side strategy. By knocking out the suppliers, we will kill the drugs. And the idea is, by taking up the drugs, the price will also go up that will prohibit usage. I did a little research. Let me tell you something. I was in college in '74. And now, although I wouldn't know this, I checked just to see what the price of a gram of cocaine is today in New Orleans, where I went to school, and what it was then. I just had some people that know. And guess what? You know what? Let me check. $75 now. Oh, yeah, sorry. $75 2012, $74 in school, according to my print. Right? It's gone down. You know why? Because it costs like $2 to make a gram of cocaine. Even if you sold them at $20 a piece, you're still making an incredible profit. I mean, the point is that this is an industry where a supply side strategy is just almost impossible. The other aspect is, I just got the new, this is the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime Drug Report 2011. And it tells you that in fact, the production areas of cocaine have gone down significantly by like 18%. And yet we still have more than enough. And the price has not gone up. Now, there is some shining, you know, a lot of people will point to some successes. For instance, Colombia, as you well know, is a very dangerous place. It's a very popular tourist place now. And they're not growing any cocaine there anymore. You believe me? Really? It still supplies 75% of the world's cocaine. But the war's over. We won. The point is, what's over is they took out the FARC and they took out some revolutionary armies that were using drugs as a way to do things. But what's happened is it's still a fertile growing area. And of course, you've got Peru, you've got Bolivia. My friend Moss Blackman, they did a study just highlighting the areas that could produce coca leaves in South America. And they said that basically you needed like, I don't know, they said if you have like really, if you've done correctly, like 1,000 hectares would satisfy the demand in the United States. I mean, you know, well heck, South America's huge. And this is what's happened. Whenever the supply side strategy, what we've seen is when you stamp down one, it pops up somewhere else. Because there's always that opportunity, right? And this is basically kind of what's been happening in this issue. And this supply side strategy also suggests that there's, and what it also brings in is because of the violence that it escalates, and now this idea of narco-terrorism, which is different than just narco-dealing and narco-cartels, we've in essence created a bigger monster in a lot of ways. Now, so when I look at this report too, I think there's something else you need to be aware of, and this was interesting to me. Marijuana is by far still the most widely used, 203 million people. Obviously, its medical usage in California is growing every day. And what's scary is, folks, and actually, heroin consumption has kind of stayed the same. Cocaine consumption is kind of going down a little bit, but it's still pretty steady. The United States still demands 38% of the world's largest consumer of cocaine. But what's really scary, and which is interesting geographically, is because when we're talking about marijuana and cocaine and opiates, these are geographically specific drugs. You need certain climate, I mean, you need to grow them in certain areas. Coca leaves grow best in certain areas. Opiates, poppy grow best. Obviously, Afghanistan, the Middle East, and some of these in the far Southeast Asia, these are fertile growing areas for this, and this is obviously where the drug movement comes through. What is kind of, no, not kind of, it's very scary, and just completely off the charts is ATS, amphetamine-type stimulants. This is the new rage. And one of the things that was disturbing in Guadalajara not long ago is they did the largest bust in the history of crystal meth. Tons of it in a house. And that's interesting because historically this stuff is made in trailers in the middle of Iowa. I mean, really, this is not geographically specific. This can be done pretty much anywhere. So what we've seen is we're seeing a shift in the types of drugs, and more importantly, it really used to be cocaine generally was for wealthy people. It's not cheap. What's happened is they're bringing everything down. Crack cocaine, crystal meth, these are cheap things, $10, $15. They're targeting the lower economic classes. And these are always the people that are most susceptible to this type of situation. So what's happening is we're seeing kind of a global struggle in society. And certainly it is Calderon's actions our admiral, and they really are, because I think he's taking these guys' head. He can't go back, and if the PRI thinks they can go backwards, it's impossible, because these guys are already too powerful. What's going to happen in the future is hard to tell. But my thinking is that I think you're going to see probably between the United States and Mexico some new arrangements that are going to have to be made. If the trouble escalates up into those borders too much, because it's already starting to spill over into the borders, you'll see American troops of some sort. They've already asked like the National Guard to go into certain areas along the borderline. For us here, I think honestly, I'll tell you the truth, I think the next 2 weeks are kind of critical to see what happens. My feeling is, I think things are calming down. I think people are coming out. And I think whether things happen still, there are always going to be things happening because there is a market here, and there always are. But this is not a major market. It's not a major transportation nexus. But it does draw attention. And, but I think the idea of foreigners being targeted, I don't see that in the cards unless these terrorists really want to jump that next level. But that brings in international forces, which I guarantee you they don't want. And as again, I think what you are seeing is you're seeing forces gang up on the Zetas, and you're seeing them like it did in the 60s with some of the mafia guys. They're targeting some of the most brutal henchmen to try to get rid of them. The idea being that this is bad for business. It's bad for business. When people are dying, it brings too much attention to them. A lot of the old school cartels would much rather go back to the old days when that wasn't the case. So you're either going to see a concentrated effort among these cartels, alliances where they take out the most heinous groups to try to calm it down with the help of government forces or likewise, or you're going to see, sadly, it's not far-fetched to think that troops from the U.S. and England could come in here at some point. I pray that doesn't happen because I think that would be a mistake, because usually in the past when we look at these places, it usually has been a mistake. The good news is that they are taking it down. Demand is lessening in the United States for the most part, a little bit, but not enough. And really what it calls on is, and if you look at the state of the United States, it's not surprising that demand recently did pick up a little bit. Why? People don't have jobs. People are depressed. People are concerned. This stimulates alcohol. Go to any AA, Alcoholics Anonymous group and find out, yeah, when things are bad, alcoholism goes up, so does drug use. So these are the factors that are kind of affecting it. And finally, I want to talk about the hype just real quick. The media. The media hype in the United States about crime and everything down has been going on for a long time. And I've been always I haven't slammed them too bad because I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But the reality is, I've talked to people, legislators in Florida, and I've talked to developers. I'm working with some people that are looking to open the first really true kind of senior housing development here. And these people are looking at it, and I can tell you that states like Florida, Arizona, New Mexico that depend on tourism, that depend on retirement tourism and retirees moving there, with the upcoming baby boomer retirement, which has just started, considering that population still controls like 60% of the wealth, the concept of not just Mexico, but Costa Rica, Panama, all these places in the world that are alternative retirement destinations, this should scare places like Florida. And it makes sense. There is a vested interest in keeping their retirees close to home. There's a vested interest in them doing that, to keep that money here, and keep that money in the United States. That money comes here. We did a brief study here one time, and we figured the economic impact here was minimum like $300 million a year. That's a lot of money. And if you look at INEGI's quality of life indices, the Calidad Vida, and you look at these types of things, Mexicans here have a quality of life that you find in a lot of the rural, urban areas, some of the nicer areas in Mexico, because they've been held up by, because it's been bolstered by the American dollar, the Canadian dollar, foreign currency, people coming in and out, the services they need. So all of these factors, I think, are important. And so when we think about the problems about the media, we need to realize that it's probably not going to change that much, and yet you do see people taking active roles in their websites that promote that it's better. And when you look at these statistics, I'm from New Orleans. New Orleans is a wonderful city. I love it. But New Orleans and Detroit are always fighting for the worst crime. The worst place. Disneyland had 7.5 murders last year per 100,000, which is less than Cancun and Puerto Vallarta. Okay? You know, and I do statistics, and statistics lie so good. I mean, you can make them say anything you want. And yes, the murder rate is high here. It's due to isolated incidents in certain areas. And generally, 85% of these things are basically directed with these drug people. So, you know, my feeling on all of this is that we're in the midst of an evolution of a society, and we really are. Mexico has Mexico's economy is much stronger than the United States right now. Their middle class has grown. It's almost 60%. It's the largest it's been, second only Brazil in terms of growth rate. This is a country that's growing, and it's going through its growing pains, just like every country does. And it just so happens its growing pains happen to be attached to the nose and to the lip of the United States. And so there's a connection there, right? You know, and so we're going to be struggling with that for a while. And, you know, my best advice, people, you know, I have a lot of friends that have left, and they ask me, are you leaving? I said, no, I'm not. I got 2 little kids. Am I leaving? No. Am I worried about my kids? Sure. I'm always worried about my kids. But you know what? When I was up in Connecticut, at one of the schools, there was a guy that took 3 kids, took them out, sodomized them, and killed them. So, you know, crime happens everywhere. And thankfully here, generally speaking, if you're smart and you kind of watch yourself, and I applaud the police chief, and I applaud what they did, the idea of 70,000 eyes, 2 times, that's 140,000 eyes. People are calling, and, you know, people say, yeah, but can you trust them? I said, you know what? You have to. You have to. Because you know what? If they don't deliver, that message gets out too. Because the beauty of the world right now is that the eyes can be on any place, anytime. And so if something bad happens, they know about it. If something good happens, they know about it. All of these can be transferred. And so, you know, we're in a state of evolution. So, you know, all I can say is to be safe, and I hope you learned a little about something about this. And
we'll be happy to run over with your questions after 11:30, and if you need to go, please do so quietly. We'll just keep on till I guess we're fairly satisfied. So, somebody will bring you the mic, and we have here. Do we need another mic, Dave? Formerly Keith.
Hi, I'm Tom. Thank you very much.
sure.
Legalizing drugs. Just that aspect alone is that anywhere near a possibility where the government can put up pharmacies of drugs and be actually competing against this. This idea has been bounced around for years. I'd like your opinion.
Well, I can tell you that the medical marijuana industry in California is completely poised to jump on the bandwagon when they decriminalize marijuana. I mean, they are ready. They've got everything in place. I read a study that I actually had a friend of mine who our old friend Matt Pierce, who's no longer with us, who was, and he had cancer, and he got his medical marijuana card, and he went in, and he was talking to the guy in San Diego or wherever he was, and they were saying that this one little store was grossing $250,000 a month for marijuana sales. Okay? And you know, the reality is, and I will say this, I guarantee you that some people are thinking about it because the tax issues in California could certainly be remedied by looking at decriminalization or something like that. And let me explain something too. And if you look certainly into Netherlands and Sweden and some northern parts of Europe where they literally decriminalized almost all drug use and just with some exceptions, you find that among that population, there's been no rise in drug use. The argument to that is that these are culturally homogenous countries. These are nation states. When you're born in Denmark, you come out, you're a Lutheran, whether you like it or not. You're a Lutheran. But these are, nation states are bound by not only politics, but by culture. And so in essence, they're very culturally bound. And that's why things like cooperative living and communal living work very well in these places, because they really have similar strengths. The argument you get from a lot of people is that the United States is certainly not like that. It's kind of the land of the mongrels. I mean, we're a mix of all sorts of ideas and everything else. And so the question is, would that work on a full tilt thing? But I would be stunned if we don't see within the next 5-10 years at least 1 or 2 states make some attempts at decriminalizing marijuana and legalizing it. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of thoughts. First, I want to thank you for all of the information and the facts. It's been fascinating, and I appreciate it. I've got a couple of thoughts, and I'd really appreciate your input on this. I cannot understand what I call stupidity of a government that feels this. The stupidity of a government that feels it can stop people from doing what they want. In the United States, they had the Volstead Act, prohibition, didn't work. They had illegal abortions, trying to stop them, didn't work. Alcohol, as they say, the Volstead Act. Prostitution, didn't work. Any government that thinks that they're going to stop people from getting what they want is very ill-informed. The United States has put its problem on Mexico. It wasn't Mexico's problem before. Live and let live. Take care of the people as best you can. Fine. But now, the United States has said, we're friends, and friends support friends, no matter what it costs you. And the Mexican government has gone along with this. And one last thing. How do you feel when it comes right down here? You talked about the police chief. Now, I wasn't there. I was enjoying life outside of Mexico, not in the United States, actually. He says, be vigilant, be vigilant. The thing that came out of that, from everything I've heard, is basically you're on your own. That is it. My feeling is walk vigilantly and carry your own big stick. Here is something I think every woman and every man should have. Nobody's going to mess with you. You have that. I'd like
Your point's well taken. Be careful of that. I'd always be afraid of putting that in my pocket and sitting on it wrong and just I'm nervous about that. But no, your point well taken. First of all, why does the government do that? Well, because this is it's a political thing, and it's an issue of control, and this has always been something that's, again, this is evolution, and the European governments have tackled this differently because they've been around a lot longer than we have. And so part of that's there. I think that putting the problem on Mexico is true, but realize this, that Mexico is growing, and they're changing. I'll tell you, in my students in my university class, their parents had, 6 or 7 brothers and sisters. These guys have 2 or 3 brothers and sisters. They are following the trajectory of the United States. And because of that, they say there's no drug problem in Mexico. That's not really entirely true. There is a growing drug problem in Mexico because it's not as bad as the United States, because so far the family unit is still pretty tight. And that's what separates it. So I think that I do agree that I think it's ill-informed, and I think that it's just one of those things that's going to take somebody very bold. I think it's going to be a state that does something first, and you're going to see it trickle down. I think you see some changes. I agree. I mean, I think psychologically, if you look at, a kid, you tell a kid you can't do that, they want to do it. And it pretty much applies to drug use and everything else. It really does. And they've proven that in a lot of the European states. As far as the police chief, I know what you're saying, but my sense is this. I think that these guys they're under the gun. They're being watched. They're being looked at now very carefully. There's CNN people here. They're being looked at. They're always being questioned about their loyalty and their trustworthiness. And that's actually one of the best ways to clean up corruption, is with people looking over your shoulder. And the good thing about the media today, the good thing is that they can be over there anytime looking over your shoulder. And the spotlight is kind of here now. And because it's here, that may also make the dealers kind of move away. Because when the spotlight comes, they don't want to be there too long. I think that what he was saying is that they can't do it alone, and they can't. Last night I was sitting at Barco, and I can tell you, I saw like 7 of the cop cars drive by lights on. They did it a couple of times. It's a show of force. I think it's good. There needs to be a show of force. They need to see that they're out there. So I understand where you're coming from, and I think that it's valid, but I think you have to realize that there's all the different sides to this too. So good point.
I'm curious, how many people are we talking about? When you talk about the cartels in the Ajijic area, how many people are we talking about?
As far as, like, what are you talking about? People, the number, like, actually cartel people that are here?
That are involved with being bad activity.
Well, I mean, realize that a lot of these cartels, that they don't live here. They come here and they leave. And some of these bodies that were thrown originally were bodies that weren't even from here. And some of these people in the initial times when we've had problems, they were not Chapalans. They were not people from here. What has happened is a lot of the local small-time drug dealers have been targeted as these guys come in looking to who controls, and they want to say, you come over to our team or else. So, but as far as the numbers, I mean, realize it doesn't take more than like a gang of about 10 or 15 people with automatic rifles that might do some pretty serious work. They got some safe houses in Rancho del Oro, and they got some in San Nicolas. But generally speaking, I mean, you know, these were places, and, you know, they found some grenades, they found some long-arm rifles, but it isn't like huge caches it's not like huge caches of armaments. I mean, you know, these are, and quite honestly, this stuff's probably been going on for a long time, as far as I can tell. You know, and so you've got there is a small market here, and it's more for these cartels sometimes, it's more of just planting your territory. It's like a dog pissing on the yard, you know? I mean, this is ours now, and we've got it. And this is kind of what you're talking about here. This is a conflict between these guys, and we're stuck in the middle. And so I don't think there's incredible amounts of people here, but I do think, you know, these are small groups, and I think they come and they go, because that's the way they don't get caught.
Hi, David. Excellent presentation. And what it demonstrated to me was the vast knowledge that exists about the drug cartels, who they are, where they are here in Mexico. But Mexico is really just a wholesaler. And it all goes up to the border, then it goes into the U.S., and no one ever talks about, and this is what my question is, no one ever talks about, well, what happens then? You've got a market of 350 million people there, all these large packets of wholesale drugs got to be broken down and distributed. Who's in control up in the U.S.? And why is it we don't seem to ever hear anything about who those people are, whereas everybody knows who the Mexican cartels are? What's happening in the States, and why do we never hear about it?
Well, and there are things happening in the States, and not too long ago, I think it was about 6 months ago in Chicago, they broke up a fairly large ring that was connected to the Mexican cartels going up. Realize, too, that the Mexican cartels, and some of these cartels, because they are really more like military, they're working with all sorts of different organizations, organized crime everywhere. I mean, and actually, you know, for Europe, Africa's become the kind of principal migration route. They go across the Atlantic into Africa, and due to the vastness of Africa and the difficulty of patrolling there, usually the drugs go up north to Europe on that side. But you're right, I mean, the thing is, they are taking apart some of these groups up there, but the problem is, that's harder for the U.S. guys to do, and they don't talk about it because they're probably not doing as well as they want to be. It's a huge industry up there. The concern is, and one of the reasons, one of the things that some of the in law enforcement has cited as a reason to come down here, isn't so much what's happening here, but the fact that the Mexican cartels are getting up in there, that they're in the United States operating, displacing other organized groups. Okay, so that's becoming one of the arguments to maybe come down here. Because in order to dismantle it up there, you dismantle it down here. And I've had luck in connecting a couple. I knew a big one was found in the Chicago area, and there was another one in the LA area that I know that they connected. But again, I think, generally speaking, I think, politics and media, you guys can flip through the different channels and CNN, and you can go to Fox News, you can go to different news channels and automatically tell who they're supporting and what side they're looking at. And some paint a better picture, and I think that painting a bleaker picture of what's going down here often takes your eyes off of what's happening up there. So I think that's another issue, and that's why you get a call. Yeah.
We're going to have 3 more questions. This one, and then you.
I'd like to thank you for your presentation also. Now you mentioned that Mexico is becoming more of a producer of drugs with the marijuana there. But what can Mexico do or do better with its southern border to stop the trafficking coming through?
That's difficult. Have you ever been down to the Guatemalan Chiapas border? And I've been down to it's a pretty dense forest area. And what they've done in Colombia, they wiped out a lot of areas. Let me tell you what happens. When they wipe out the area, then you're talking about an environmental disaster. And that's what happens sometimes. Destroying fields. It used to be, years ago, remember they sprayed paraquat. Well, that had all sorts of terrible ramifications for the environment and stuff. As far as border control, generally speaking, what you see down there is because the U.S. can't. That's where a lot of the real issues come in, human trafficking and everything, because it is pretty much a desolate area. The Mexican army have gone down there more now. They're down there more, but I think their feeling is that getting down into that area is almost, when you get into almost like it's almost like guerrilla style and stuff. So that has been one of the weakest links, and that is one of the easy areas to get across. The United States border is huge and vast, but at least you can see it, you have radar. When you get that heavy dense forest, even with certain types of infrared and stuff, it's definitely good. That is a significant issue. And again, that's why Mexico's always been the supply route, because of that kind of very few people live along that borderline, and it's a very desolate area. And so that's one of the reasons why it's always an easy place to bring it in. So you're a good point, though. That's one of the big causes they have to attack to really take care of that.
To be fair, I have to give a brief introduction. I'm Gordon Howitt, PhD, specialized in human learning, and I want to say that for my time, it's always worthwhile for me to listen to any speaker to make sure that it's a professor.
Thanks, sir.
And of course, we're all specialized, and we can't quite communicate with each other discipline very well. So I'm going to ask a question for you based upon your background, but I'll let you project and estimate or guess about the economic value of this. That is the proposal you've heard before, that government set up a health unit and sell the drugs by admission in controlled way, and they're also in treatment so that they have to reduce. In other words, they won't overpay, they won't overcharge, but they'll charge enough to meet the market. Now, this is out of your area of geography, I suppose, but nonetheless, you do the best you can to predict, shall we say, for the social scientists, because actually in Vancouver, British Columbia, the social scientists are in charge of their I guess they call it the health harm reduction program, right? So if that were possible, do you think that there could be cooperation on the economic side as well as the health side.
Yes, as a matter of fact, my friend Moss Blackman, they had some sociologists work on this project, and the reality is a demand side strategy would emphasize treatment, education, and also, let's face it, when you look at the people that are generally targeted that start, particularly, as I said, with these ATS drugs, these amphetamine beds, they're going after the kind of the marginalized group, the marginalized population. And the economic impact those people will have on healthcare, on lack of education, lack of job training is incredible. And so tying that into economic by stopping that potential drain of the of the human resources and keeping that in check, the economic impacts far outweigh any kind of negative aspects of that. So I completely agree with you, and I think that and also, I mean, think about it. If they legalize pot or some of these drugs, it's just a whole new industry, private industry of new breathing apparatus to check your toxicity level of THC. And I mean, we're an entrepreneurial society that will find ways in both private and public sector to make this work. So I think I think what you're saying is correct. I don't see any problem with it. I think it's something, and again, I think you're going to see this in one or more of the states in the United States in 5 to 10 years, because I think they're going to have to, because they're going to see that